This might be the first time I'm doing a movie recommendation video for someone who's seen more movies than I have. Your four favorites are Mulholland Drive, Casablanca, Once Upon a Time in America, and Heat. Despite having seen over 2,000 more movies than I have, I was surprised you didn't have a lot of my go-to recommendations marked as watched. My top choice for you is Miami Vice. You had the pilot episode of the series marked as watched, but not the 2006 film. But like Heat, it was directed by Michael Mann and some characters are detectives. Like Mulholland Drive, it has a sort of dreamlike quality to it, and Justin Theroux was in it. It was also based on a TV series, and Mulholland Drive was originally a TV pilot that didn't get picked up. It's a crime film like Once Upon a Time in America. And like Casablanca, there's a romance with a woman who may or may not be involved with another man. High and Low is a crime film like Heat and Once Upon a Time in America. It also has gorgeous cinematography and frequently appears on lists of the best movies ever made like Mulholland Drive and Casablanca. The Big Heat came to mind because it's like Heat, but bigger. The Big Heat, like Casablanca, is a black and white American film directed by a filmmaker from Central Europe. Like Once Upon a Time in America and Heat, it can be considered a gangster film. It's also a noir film, and Mulholland Drive is a neo-noir. And there's a scene in this film with the song Put the Blame on Mame, which is written for the movie Gilda, which I would have recommended if you hadn't already seen it, because as I'm sure you already know, Laura Harring's character in Mulholland Drive chose the name Rita after seeing a Gilda poster. Coincidentally, Glenn Ford is in both Gilda and the Big Heat. Speaking of Rita in Mulholland Drive, the relationship between Betty and Rita is reminiscent of Three Women and Persona. I also tend to recommend The Double Life of Veronique to Mulholland Drive fans because both films involve doppelgangers. The surreal, dreamlike atmosphere of Mulholland Drive reminds me a lot of Last Year at Marienbad, which was directed by Alain Resnais. Alain Resnais also directed one of my go-to recommendations for fans of Casablanca, Hiroshima Mon Amour. Like Casablanca, it's an exploration of love and memory amidst the backdrop of war. There's also a nightclub in this film named Casablanca. It's also one of the most influential films of the French New Wave, which can also be said about The 400 Blows, which was one of the first films that came to mind when I was thinking of Once Upon a Time in America. If you like the scenes of Noodle's childhood in Once Upon a Time in America, I think you'll appreciate this movie. There will be blood. Like Once Upon a Time in America follows a character who's driven by ambition and greed over the course of decades. The same could be said about Amadeus. There's a scene in Once Upon a Time in America that seems heavily inspired by a scene in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, but I don't want to say which one because spoilers. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, like Casablanca, is a romantic drama filmed and set during World War II. It also spans decades of a character's life, like Once Upon a Time in America. There were two Stanley Kubrick films that came to mind that you didn't have marked as watched. The first being Barry Lyndon, which is an epic like Once Upon a Time in America and takes place during wartime like Casablanca. And the second is The Killing, which is a heist film like Heat. A few other heist films I think you'd enjoy since you like Heat are The Sting, Hell or High Water, Le Cercle Rouge, and The Town. I had a lot of good movies written down for this one, so I was struggling to decide on one last film to recommend, but I think I'm going to go with The Vanishing because it has that sort of cat and mouse dynamic like Heat, and it's an unsettling mystery like Mulholland Drive.